You've tuned into Stranger Than Fiction News, broadcasting live from the dark side of the planet. We've got the smoking gun, the absolute proof that this pandemic is part of the Agenda 21. Ladies and gentlemen, world government has unleashed this virus. Have no doubt about it. Are you ready for the presentation? This is going to be a crude, rough draft of the final cut, and we're going to discover a lot of things together, but we've been able to piece quite a bit so far. Before Event 201, there was Clade X, brought to you by the same group, Johns Hopkins and the Bloomberg School of Public Health. That reminds us we had to load something up here. But you've seen the maps, the Johns Hopkins maps of the outbreak. There's a reason why everybody's using the Johns Hopkins map of the outbreak. And it's related to Clade X and Event 201. Same people, same logos. You're going to see it for yourselves. And what's really troubling here is that during their exercises, which were these huge events, and they brought in all the libtards from the libtard world order in to pose as, acting presidents and Senate majority leaders and the like. But we're going to be getting into some of these segments, if you will, from their presentation. We're going to start with Clade X, and then we're going to evolve time-wise into Event 201. And it paints the picture quite well. You can see them preparing, trying to work out the finer points of when this exercise goes live. And we're going to be getting into that and so much more. We're essentially positioning ourselves for this first clip. And of course, the video guy is not cooperating. We'll have to see how this looks. And looks pretty fucking good. So let's get into their mock-up CNN presentation here.
How is the rest of the world responding? Well, Australia, China, and South Africa are restricting travel from Germany and Venezuela. Health officials around the world are screening travelers and investigating possible cases. As of now, there are no reported cases in the U.S. As you can imagine, this outbreak is major international news. Numerous media outlets are in round-the-clock coverage mode. Some are calling the outbreak a flu pandemic, and one network has dubbed it the German flu.
Now, you'll notice that, the volume kind of sucks here, so this is a rough draft. But you'll notice here that all of these cult members that are appearing on GNN, for the most part, are going to be wearing the occult colors of red and black, kind of like the Sith and Star Wars and the Empire. There's a relationship there, but we'll continue
Although
on.
Experts emphasize that para-influenza and influenza are unrelated, and there has never been a para-influenza pandemic. Scientists have now given this new strain a name, para-influenza Clade X. You are going to be hearing a lot more about it in the days, weeks, and possibly months to come.
Okay, so there we are. And with that as the background, I want to invite Eric.
So, basically they're having this summit, much like a Davos or a Bilderberg. And, they've got mock Secretary of Defense, former politicians, the who's who of the libtard list preparing for this. And they're talking about all the things that they need to control and do for this epidemic. And we get some real startling statements like, we're going to need to fine-tune this for the stakeholders. And you start to understand that what they're doing here is trying to prepare for what they're going to unleash. And this isn't about some kind of readiness response simulation. This is really preparing for the exercise to go live. And we're going to try and just zoom through some of the GNN news reports that they've mocked up, preparing for this eventual release. Again, this is a plandemic, have no doubt about it. let's get to the next clip if we can.
So I want to show you a final clip from this morning on that situation.
Caracas is in chaos. On a good day, the government teeters on the brink of being a failed state, and the current outbreak of Clade X could send it over the edge. Although government officials are still denying there is an outbreak, hospitals are overloaded, and reporters on the ground say many sick people cannot get the medical help they need. Cuban doctors have arrived, and several Russian military planes have been spotted at the airport carrying what appear to be medical personnel. Our sources say they have also seen Iranian and Chinese teams disembarking. How dire is this situation? Well, a few hours ago, I spoke with a senior physician from the Venezuelan Health Observatory, a research center at the Central University of Venezuela in Caracas. He asked to remain anonymous, but sent me this statement. He writes, "The government says nothing is happening. It is lying. The hospitals in Caracas are overflowing with incredibly sick patients. The hospitals don't have the isolation capabilities to handle those who are admitted, and many people are being turned away. The hospitals just don't have the capacity to handle them all."
Issues with the Venezuelans, but as far as protecting the American people, I think this is something that everybody ought to be able to understand.
Okay.
Oh, we understand what's going on. We're going to, breeze through this. There's quite a few clips that we need to kind of look at here. And we're going to continue on with their GNN presentations, because that really is kind of like the most striking part. And they've got one in every segment here. Let's see their mock news reports, if we can.
Welcome back with Clade X. For more, we go to Emily Schmidt in South Norwich. Emily.
Jean, 12 students have been hospitalized at the Berkshire Regional Medical Center, and we regret to report one has died. A local public health official told me she suspects the outbreak may have started with a student who had recently returned from a semester abroad in Germany. 2 days after he returned, he developed a mild cold and headache for a few days, but did not seek medical attention. The Berkshire County Public Health Officer has issued a quarantine order for the college. Under this order, 800 students, 40 faculty, and 50 support staff may not leave the school grounds for 2 weeks. The students are required to stay in their dormitories. No visitors are allowed on campus, including parents. Prepackaged food is being delivered to the dormitories. Parents of students are loudly objecting. Some are protesting outside the governor's office, demanding the governor overrule the county health officer and lift the quarantine. Jean, I have to tell you, this quarantine does not seem to be very effective. Campus security, supplemented by several local police officers from South Norwich, are attempting to establish a cordoned area, but several people have been seen leaving and entering the dormitories. Law enforcement officers do not appear to know what levels of force are authorized. Mary Witherston's 18-year-old, now quarantined daughter is at...
Well, undoubtedly this is happening in Berkshire because of Berkshire Hathaway. And undoubtedly this is happening with the Event 201 because of the Bloomberg connection. So, we can already start painting a nice little picture in terms of who's involved here, but we'd say this is definitely Libtard, New World Order, Bloomberg, probably Berkshire Hathaway, probably Amazon as well. They're the big beneficiaries from this, and they seem to be a nice little Clade X out there in New York, New Babylon. But it's too early to limit the list of suspects at that. Of course, all world governments let this virus in according to schedule, according to plan. And we've got the clips of, them basically saying this is a plandemic, live exercise. This was artificially inserted into our country. So we've got all the clips. We can play those again, but there's plenty of reasons to believe this is another 9/11. And this, seeing these mock-ups, just going back to this GNN clip here. I mean, it's pretty much what's happening right now. Students coming back from, an overseas trip, get the virus, the school shut down, 2-week quarantine, protests, et cetera, et cetera. And notice the red and black theme. Purple, of course, is the color of the betrayer. It references, mixing, being double-minded. We won't get into the color-coded things right now, but I think that's the only GNN clip in that segment. We'll move on to the next one. We're gonna have to clip all of these together. Again, this is part of CLADE-X, Pandemic Exercise, from the same people, Johns Hopkins and Bloomberg, that brought you Event 201. And, of course, it's the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg map that you see everywhere since the beginning of this outbreak, right? So you have to pay attention to those details. Let's move on to the next one. Again, this is just kind of like a rough cut.
Welcome back from lunch, and please.
Welcome back, you fucking bitch. Let's see. Let's find, pardon the language here, let's find ourselves another GNN clip if we can. They must, I thought we saw one. It looked like that was one. That's a mock-up. Hold on, let's play it.
Joining us is Dr. Dana Welsh, CEO of St. Elizabeth's Medical Center in Philadelphia. Dr. Welsh, why is your hospital turning away patients being transferred from D.C.?
Gene, we do not have a specialized biocontainment unit, and putting CLADE-X patients in our hospital threatens our staff and our patients.
So you see they bring in doctors, experts, it's all scripted, and this has been scripted for quite a while. Now, this is the 2018 version of Event 201. This is the 201 predecessor. It's on their website. We should really kind of put out the links to this, but you can find it for yourself. CLADE-X Pandemic Exercise, Event 201. It's on the Center for Health Security.org website. And perhaps that's the only GNN mock-up. What do we see here in this exercise? We see Tom Daschle playing the Senate Majority Leader in this simulation. So they've got, the hardcore libtards involved here. This is definitely a libtard operation, but it looks like every New World Order government let this virus in. And they knew about this way back in November of last year, according to unsurfaced intelligence reports. They were getting briefings at the National Security Council level about a raging epidemic in Wuhan in early November. So they had all of November, all of December, all of January, all of February, right? And, in hindsight, a lot of the things that they said in the press conference really start to make sense now. Like, they're ahead of schedule. This is all going according to schedule. So we're going to get to the next segment here, if we can. And then we'll get into Event 201. And then we're going to get into recently discovered research on coronavirus. It's really going to blow you away. But let's play this if we can. This will have a lengthy GNN clip. Okay, here we go.
This news just in. At least some of the individuals responsible for the CLADE-X virus are now under arrest. They are members of A Brighter Dawn, or ABD, the group that had claimed responsibility. However, authorities believe that key members of ABD's leadership may still be at large. In addition, Interpol has announced that after a long and exhaustive investigation, the laboratory in Switzerland where the virus was created has been raided and shut down. It was masquerading as a small biotech firm in an industrial park outside Zurich. The group was traced to the location through interviews with scientists who work in related fields. Some of them told law enforcement that they had long suspected that ABD's scientists might be dangerous, but they didn't know what to do about it or where to report their suspicions. Sources say the captured ABD members are telling police there were a total of 6 successful releases of aerosolized CLADE-X in public places in Bethesda, Frankfurt, Caracas, Hong Kong, Dubai, and Kabul. After extensive interviews with the captured ABD members, however, authorities now believe there were an additional 4 releases of CLADE-X, which did not result in sustained transmission of the disease.
Now, it's interesting that in the original script of Clade X, it was a bioterror attack, and there were independent aerosolized releases in various cities. And this is actually kind of like what we're seeing in the next strain analysis of all of the different genotypes that are being submitted to the gene bank. We're seeing like the very first California case was much, much older in terms of mutations than everything else that was around it previously. The first case in Washington, the first case in Illinois, the cases in Wuhan. This thing looked twice as old as the other strains. So it looks like, it looks like there have been independent releases, not that they needed it, but just to be sure. That's what it looks like. Now, we're going to be getting into more of that. We're going to jump into event 201. And again, we just want to reference where all of this is coming from. If you're just joining us, this is Clade X at the Center for Health Security.org, Johns Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Public Health. Now, if you remember the maps that you see everywhere, it's the Johns Hopkins maps, right? It's part of the Clade X and Event 201. Notice the logos. It's the same thing, same website. And you'll see the GNN. You'll see it all for yourselves once again. But the Event 201 takes a different twist. Now, what's interesting, too, what we didn't really see, but it's there in the Clade X videos, is that their para-influenza looks just like a coronavirus. And in Event 201, it's actually specified as a coronavirus, which is really interesting. It's a novel coronavirus. It's the exact same script, but it's gone from exercise to real world. And this is the proof of that. And you see, just the striking similarities, which really should blow everybody away, especially the Johns Hopkins connection, as well as, Bloomberg. He was there spending $1 billion to try to get elected, but he's just gone with the fucking wind when it comes to this outbreak. So let's play a little bit of this, and the volume hopefully is about right.
And rivals with climate change, which means that the pandemic risk to lives and livelihood.
Continuing our coverage of the newly discovered CAPS disease and the scope of its deadly outbreaks, there are now more than 30,000 reported cases. Experts warn this may be just the beginning of a global problem. GNN science reporters have produced a video about what we know so far about CAPS, the virus, the outbreak, and the resulting chaos.
CAPS is a novel coronavirus related to those viruses that caused the frightening SARS epidemic in 2003 and the deadly MERS outbreaks in recent years. Scientists think each infected person in turn infects on average 2 more people. This disease is proving more transmissible than SARS or MERS and about as contagious as influenza. Essentially, the cumulative number of cases is doubling every week. At this rate, we can expect to see 16 times as many cases in a month unless we find a way to interrupt transmission. The virus appears to be spreading rapidly in densely populated and impoverished neighborhoods in some megacities in South America. CAPS is a serious respiratory disease. More than half of the recognized cases have required hospital care, creating a huge strain on healthcare systems. The fatality rate is about 10%. For comparison, CAPS is about as lethal as SARS and 2 to 4 times more lethal than the 1918 influenza pandemic, the worst pandemic on record. Even so, some people only exhibit mild flu-like symptoms, not requiring treatment in a hospital. Alarmingly, those people are able to walk around and spread the virus, not realizing they are doing so. Even worse, international travelers have been arriving at their destinations symptom-free, but within a matter of hours, becoming ill. Travel-related cases have blossomed into outbreaks in a number of locations and have quickly grown faster than health authorities could respond and contain them. In other places, physicians have quickly recognized the symptoms of CAPS and have been able to isolate infected individuals and avoid an outbreak.
So this is just like the outbreak we're seeing now. I mean, you thought the Project ZYPHR was something when a YouTube video last August came out talking about top secret documents referencing a pandemic influenza that kills millions. And here we are. So we're getting a lot of chatter about this virus before it hits. Not only, in the Project ZYPHR and not only in Event 201, but Clade X. And they're describing this, to the T, exactly what we're seeing on TV. And why? Because they were preparing the script, years ago, essentially, with GNN. And now, they basically got the final draft. They got the final cut prepared, and that's what you're seeing on television. But all of these people were getting together to basically coordinate their efforts, the media, all of the specialists and all of the branches, et cetera, et cetera. You got people there from every imaginable, agency pretty much, and defense establishment there. They're all there, either retired or current, and, they're all there basically preparing for this. And the script is, to the T. And you can see these are all libtards. This robot looks like Zuckerberg. Look at that one. That's a Zuckerbot. Now, let's see what the next GNN broadcast holds, if we can. Let's see what this
Antibiotics
is.
are dwindling. Countries and companies are reportedly stockpiling supplies.
Yeah, well, we're seeing some of that. Let's see. So this might give us some insight as far as, when we should expect an end game. But obviously they're going to lock everything down for as long as they can get away with it and kill as many people as they can get away with. And a lot of that's happening during the lockdown. They want people locked down so that they'll die at home. And we'll be getting into the full spectrum of this disease because we've unearthed some very disturbing documents. So get your diapers on. Let's see what else we got here.
The scenario now advances 3 weeks to November 7th, 2019, to the second meeting of the Pandemic Emergency Board.
Thank you all for reconvening on short notice.
And they're all infected.
Public health crisis, CAPS is creating havoc with the trade and travel industries. The frightening public health toll of CAPS continues to mount. Patients are overwhelming healthcare facilities around the world, including many of the makeshift triage and temporary care facilities. People are avoiding public spaces out.
So obviously they're ahead of schedule on that one. They decided to go full lockdown right away instead of just letting people avoid. Doesn't look like there was a whole lot in that segment. It was just about travel and the like, finance discussion. There might be a nice little GNN clip in here. We look forward to those GNN clips, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see. What do we got? What do we got here? Let's see. Yeah, we got it. Here it is.
Response to the CAPS pandemic is now the most expensive international emergency ever. Political leaders around the globe are faced with many impossible dilemmas, including financial. We have two guests today to discuss the bottom line of catastrophic response. First up is economist Dave Gamble. Are we out of money?
The best way to answer that is no, we are not out of money. Yet. But the fact is we are trending in a dangerous direction.
Boring. Let's see. We must have more. This looks like...
Later, funding shortfalls are putting lives at risk and extending this devastating crisis.
Oh, look at them sneer at you. So nice. What else we got? We haven't listened to every little thing that they're talking about. There's, hours and hours of their dribble, and it doesn't seem all that interesting. But I thought the GNN segments were informative because it shows you that we're going according to their script. This is all rolling out according to their script. They're absolutely guilty here of killing people, once again. It's not just the death towers. It's not just the fluoride, the vaccines, the pesticides, the GMOs. It's the works, and now they've unleashed a virus. These people need some hardcore Nuremberg war trials, war crimes, and, all of these elected officials in every country should be, immediately recalled and put under trial because they've let this virus in. They're guilty. And they need to prove their innocence before they start mandating more crazy Agenda 21
we will now
kind of shit here. Let's see. Let's find the next GNN clip.
Reporting they've identified and deleted a disturbing number of accounts dedicated to spreading disinformation about the outbreak. For more on this, we go to our correspondent, Catalina Parks.
Chen, these accounts were created by several state-sponsored groups intending to sow political discord. And some individuals are
Must be Russian, huh?
seemingly seeking to gain financial advantages. Violence against healthcare workers and minority populations has been increasing. A recent riot highlights the real danger in these posts. Countries are reacting in different ways as to how best to manage the overwhelming amounts of dis and misinformation circulating over the internet. In some cases, limited internet shutdowns are being implemented to quell panic.
Did you hear that? Limited internet shutdowns are being used to quell panic. So this is part of the script. See how they were planning this? Oh, look at all these people reporting the news. They're fake news now. And they've been censored. And it's only our script that matters. And so you can see how they're trying to control the conversation. They're trying to control the narrative. And they basically label everything that's not them, everything that's not part of the script as fake news. And that way they're the only credible source, right? But you can see that they've scripted this for years. And, every news reporter that you see on television, every anchor is a script reader. That's their official title. They read a teleprompter and you're just hearing, the New World Order script. And that's not genuine news. You know what I mean? That's misinformation. But let's continue on.
Thank you, Catalina. For more on this, we are joined by experts on crisis communications and social media, Kevin McAleese and Sarah Lee.
To me, it is clear countries need to make strong efforts to manage both mis- and disinformation. We know social media companies are working around the clock to combat these disinformation campaigns.
Now, you'll notice that on ScrewTube, for the longest time, as soon as you watched a COVID virus video, there was like the big World Health Organization logo, right? Right away, no matter where you were actually, Twitter, Facebook, it's like, go check out the World Health Organization. They were all feeding you, that same script. And then after Trump came on and said, these people are guilty of colluding with the Chinese, then now all of a sudden you see, you don't see the logo anymore. But they still kind of refer you to the World Death Organization. So they're trying to distance themselves. They've been kind of, branded as evil. But that's just the beginning of the story. But they're all in it together. All the socialist media platforms, all the television news stations, and the politicians, they're all basically going according to script. They're going according to Event 201. And Bloomberg is out there pulling the levers somehow, believe it or not.
The task of identifying every bad actor is immense. And experts agree that new disinformation campaigns are being generated every day.
Every day.
This is a huge problem that's going to keep us from ending the pandemic. And
It's independent news reports that are going to stop us from ending the pandemic, they say.
Might even lead to the fall of governments.
The fall of illegitimate fucking governments that have basically hijacked the system and are trying to kill the world's population. I mean, these people need to be deposed, recalled, and tried for war crimes. Who agrees out there? Like and share. Feel free to mirror this content.
In the Arab Spring. If the solution means controlling and reducing access to information, I think it's the right choice.
I agree with Kevin. This is a big problem and doesn't even account for the massive amounts of misinformation being generated by legitimate users about the pandemic. But it's not just trolls who are spreading the fake news. It's often political leaders themselves. Who's to judge what's real or not? Would we trust every government to separate truth from lies?
I think this is more than just keeping the bad information out. It's also about making sure real public health information reaches the public. News is found from outlets other than social media. News organizations, public health groups, and companies need to help people take the right actions to protect themselves by...
This is going to cause companies to come up now to get some of the screen time as well, because they need to spread the correct information. But one thing we haven't spoken about, and I'm wondering whether it's time to talk about this, is a step up from the part of the governments on enforcement actions against fake news, right? Some of us, these new regulations that come in place about how we deal with fake news. And maybe this is a time for us to showcase some cases where we are able to bring forward some bad actors and leave it before the courts to decide whether they have actually spread some fake news.
So we have about 3 minutes left for this discussion.
Actors are actually using social media to spread rumors about specific companies in order to profit from short selling. So, along the lines of what we've been talking about, this is going to cause companies to come up now to get some of the screen time as well, because they need to spread the correct information. But one thing we haven't spoken about.
Oh, this guy was talking about, something else too, and we'll have to find it later. But let's see what's in the last clip that they call the hot wash and conclusion. Let's see what this is. Hold on.
So as you can see, the CAPS pandemic was catastrophic.
Yes, we can see that quite well. Thank you, Johns Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Public Health. Is there not another GNN clip in this thing? Wow, it looks like they're all done with the GNN. We're going to have to compile those and play them together because it was rather interesting, to say the least. Again, you can find all of this for yourselves. We want to spend a little time on... It doesn't look like there's any GNN here. So I think you got the idea. And if you're joining us late, you definitely want to watch this on replay on demand, because up to now it's been pretty okay. But this is all coming from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And this is the same, Johns Hopkins map that you're seeing everywhere when it comes to this particular situation. Now, there's other players involved, don't get us wrong, but obviously we've got a situation here. This is all going according to script, and we're going to get into what that script is. But again, we want to really kind of focus on the virus itself a little bit here, as far as what we know. But again, if you're just joining us late, you definitely want to check out CladeX. You've heard of Event 201. You probably haven't heard of CladeX, and we didn't bother to look any further. It's one of our audience members that brought this to our attention. So I want to give a big shout out to John Siegerman out there. But getting to the virus itself, and the New York Post right now, maybe we can get a little music going again. Ah, yes, the music. We probably should find a different song, but it works. It's hypnotic. You like it. New York Post, coronavirus patients report new strange symptom. Fizzing. The fuck is fizzing? But what we really want to focus on is the well-known symptoms of this virus. Include the loss of smell and taste, fever, aches, breathlessness, fatigue, dry cough, diarrhea, strokes, and seizures. And for some, no symptoms at all. They forgot the heart attack, the cytokine storm, but they probably just put that under strokes and seizures. That's what it kind of looks like. We want to get into this biology textbook in a chapter called The Biology and Pathogenesis of Coronaviruses. And this is actually really interesting because we're seeing a lot of the same symptoms, everything really being described in this manual. And I think that people should know what the biology says when it comes to coronaviruses, because right now there's a lot of limited information out in the news, and most of it is misinformation, to say the least. And we could read all of this. You can find this for yourself, undoubtedly. The Biology and Pathogenesis of Coronaviruses by H. Wedge, Siddle, and Van ter Meulen. Let's see. Let's try and go through some of these. We're not going to read the whole thing, of course, but there's some stuff that you really need to know. And we could describe it right now, but we just kind of feel like reading the textbook. And here's a real interesting chapter. This probably a section. This probably should grab your attention. Hopefully it does. Host range and organ tropism. So what kind of organs does it affect? What kind of animals does it affect? And we're learning about, cats, dogs, humans, the works. Most coronaviruses cause clinical diseases only in the species from which they were isolated and replicate predominantly in cell lines derived from that host. However, transmission to other species can be achieved, etc., etc. That wasn't what we're looking for. Hold on. There's more. Lots more. A survey of organs involved in coronavirus infections summarized in Table 4. Some coronaviruses reveal relatively restricted organ tropism, leading to disease of the respiratory system or gastrointestinal tract only. In other coronavirus infections, for example, with feline and murine, which is mouse coronaviruses, several organs are involved. The murine coronaviruses represent a group containing strains with different organ tropism, and we'll be getting into that. The first murine coronavirus described was MHV-JHM, which was isolated from a spontaneously paralyzed mouse. Subsequently, other strains were isolated from different disease conditions in different organs of mice. Murine coronavirus infections are often subclinical or inapparent, but clinical disease can be activated by co-infection with leukemia and with leukemia viruses or protozoa agents. It's interesting that, first and foremost, back in the 50s, and so they already knew that most coronaviruses, most people or animals infected with coronavirus don't show clinical disease. They're subclinical, which means it seems like they're asymptomatic. Okay? But if they go clinical to the hospital, basically, because they can't breathe or something like that, it seems like the clinical disease can be activated. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Everybody's been infected, but there's some activation going on. And whether it be the cell towers or something else, they're activating certain cities at certain times, and they could just make this thing draw out forever, like, the war on terrorism. That's why you got to take down these death towers, to be sure, legally, preferably. Vertical transmission by intrauterine infection can also occur. So maybe newborns will have a little more protection. Let's see. Prevalent diseases resulting from MHV infections are hepatitis, that's infection of the liver, encephalomyelitis. Encephalomyelitis. That's a very interesting term. And encephalo means the brain. Myelinitis is kind of like MS, where it shreds the myelin sheath around the neuron, if you remember your biology. And then enteritis, which is an infection of the small intestines. So what we're going to see here is that in almost all cases of coronavirus, it goes from an acute infection of like the nose or the throat or the lungs, and then it becomes systemic, chronic, and it evolves like cancer. A strict classification of all MHVs into hepatotrophic, they like the liver. Neurotropic, they like the neurons. Or enterotropic, they like the intestines, is not possible. However, since under certain conditions, several organs are affected, and the type of disease varies to a great extent with the age and genetic background of the host. And what these studies say is that it's kind of like luck of the lottery with what genes you have, which will give you the best immunity to it. And what we're seeing in America is that, the African American community and the Hispanic American community are shit out of luck. And that seems to be confirmed with what we're seeing in Spain. It's not the fact that they're fat or diabetic, it's the fact that they're Hispanic or black that is making a difference here. The role of murine coronaviruses as pathogens. So all of a sudden you can start thinking all sorts of crazy things like, oh, this is a phenotypic virus. It's out to get, the undesirables. The role of murine coronaviruses as pathogens of the respiratory tract must also be taken into consideration. Variants which differ in organ tropism are easily selected. And what we're seeing is that they almost all attack numerous organs, and they don't just sit there like a flu and attack the lungs and then go away. They start at the lungs, and then they go to the liver, and then they go into the blood, and then they attack everything else, basically. Several murine coronavirus strains replicate predominantly in liver tissue and induce an acute fatal hepatitis by destruction of parenchymal and Kupffer cells. The highly virulent strains of MHV2, 3, and A causes hepatitis. Various strains are less virulent, but we got the worst kind. Let's see. MHV is enteropathogenic, causes hepatitis, is virulent, let's see, etc., etc. Did we miss the oh no, here it is. MHVN is virulent only for mice which have been immunosuppressed by cortisone treatment. Avoid the cortisone then. Viruses isolated from nude mice cause chronic hepatitis and athymic mice, mice with no thymus. However, tissue culture adapted MHV NU666 bitches and NUA are also hepatropic for mice. Hold on, there's more good stuff. But this is giving us kind of like a picture, and it gets worse. Hold on. Murine coronaviruses can cause encephalitis. The strain is especially neurotropic, loves the nervous system, causing acute and chronic demyelinating diseases. So I think we're going to see a huge surge in MS and neurodegenerative diseases in the coming months. But of course, they'll conveniently tick that as a natural cause. Listen to this. By the natural intranasal route of infection, the virus invades the central nervous system. So as you breathe it in through the nose, that's the pathway for the brain. If you breathe it in through the mouth, that's the pathway for the lungs. What would you rather have? By the natural intranasal route of infection, the virus invades the central nervous system via the olfactory nerve. That's your sense of smell. So remember how these people are now saying that they lose their sense of smell and taste? Why? Because it's gone through the olfactory route. And the way it's introduced into the body makes, quite a bit of difference, it looks like. But that doesn't mean that it won't get there eventually. And the amount that you get, the dose that you get, makes a big difference. Is it, 100 people storming the gates, or is it 1,000 people, 100,000 people? The numbers make a difference. How big was your dose? So listen to this. By the natural intranasal route of infection, the virus invades the central nervous system via the olfactory nerve, initially replicating in the nasal mucosa and spreading within 6 days to the spinal cord. No shit. The outcome of experimental intracerebral infection is similar, and necrotic lesions are localized in the hippocampus, olfactory lobes, and peripheral and the periepidemial tissues. Demyelination is prevalently confined to the brainstem and spinal cord. Oh, that's a big relief. In mice, which do not develop an acute disease, involvement of gray matter is minimal, and viral antigen is detectable in white matter. Electron microscope studies in the 1970s, studies demonstrated the oligodendrocytes are the main target, but especially in young mice, virus can be detected in neurons and ependymal and endothelial cells, indicating the pantropic nature of this infection. There's a word for you. Pantropic nature of this infection. It invades all of the different organ systems, the ones that matter, you know. And we've actually got a new study from Nature that talks about how this attacks the T cells, and it's just like HIV. So it's confirmed now by Nature magazine. This is just like HIV. And it invades the fucking brain, and it invades the spinal cord, and it invades the heart, and it invades... You know what? They need to nuke the fucking Chinese. They need to arrest all of these world leaders. This whole fucking group, Event 201, they got to get nuked too. You know what I mean? Infectious virus can be isolated from animals with acute encephalomyelitis. Try saying that for yourselves. Encephalomyelitis. At any time during the disease process, mice which do not show clinical signs within the first week or which recover from disease can develop a chronic infection of the nervous system. So even if it looks like that they don't have symptoms, they can still get the chronic infection of the nervous system, the stealth encephalitis. And this, you know, we were getting reports of this weeks ago, if not a month ago, and it's exactly like, you know, the pathogenesis or the course of the disease as it was described in the textbooks in the 1980s. So I don't know why they're pretending like they're discovering this shit when it's right here and it's been here for like, you know, 40 fucking years. Observed, let's see, this, that, and the other. Their studies on remyelination, the mice indicated that some of the oligodendrocyte cells activate in remyelination. We'll get into that as far as immunity goes. Let's see, during the first 12 days of infection, virus was recoverable from the liver, brain, and spinal cord. 3 months, small foci of viral antigen was detectable in 70% of the animals 3 months later by electron microscopy. Demyelinated lesions were found, so MS. You know, and so, you know, this is like 3 months. This is like, you know, stage 3. So stage 1 is like the acute infection where you get like the pneumonia. Then stage 2 is basically like mono, as it invades your system, the spleen and the like. And then phase 3 coming up here is basically like brain damage and MS. So that's what everybody has to look forward to. Whether you thought you had symptoms or not, wait for it, because everybody's been infected by this weaponized coronavirus. That's why nuke the fucking Chinese right now. At this point, immunosuppression did not lead to clinical disease, and no infectious virus could be activated or isolated. Okay, we'll get into that maybe another day. Let's see. Virus-host interactions differ significantly between the acute disease and chronic infection. But basically, all throughout here, we're getting acute disease, chronic infection, you know, pantropic, you know, and the like in terms of its infection of the organism. Let's see, mutants, etc., etc. Let's see, what else we got that's really interesting. I mean, what haven't we discussed here? The selective tropism of mutants within the central nervous system is probably an important parameter, etc., etc. Let's see, I know we've got some other things. I don't know if we're going to read all of this, be quite honest with you right now. And most people don't care. Most of the sheeple out there don't care. They're already brain damaged. What difference does it make at this stage? Observations suggest development of acute or subacute to chronic demyelination disease is depending on the virulence of the virus, and this is a very virulent mutant of this virus, host factors such as age, immune status, and genetic background. I guess we would dare to say that older people are probably going to get it worse in terms of the works, and but we'll get back into that one of these days. Several enteropathogenic strains of murine coronaviruses have been isolated during the last few years. The viruses can cause an acute intestinal disease with a high mortality rate during the first 3 weeks of life. It's probably for newborns, intestinal contents, etc., etc. Multinucleated giant cells, mild diarrhea, intranasal. We're just kind of scanning here. There are some other things. Not sure what else we could say. Human coronaviruses are often responsible for common colds and are associated with lower respiratory tract diseases and probably enteric diseases. Essentially, two groups of isolates can be distinguished. One group grows in tissue cultures of human origin, and et cetera, et cetera. These viruses are distributed worldwide, and antibodies are present with high prevalence. The antibody response appears to have a cycle of several years, with peaks against each strain every 2 to 3 years. About 15% of common colds are attributed to coronaviruses. In child, pneumonia and other respiratory distress can be caused by coronaviruses. Results of sero-epidemiological survey indicate a possible association of coronaviruses with more severe diseases such as pneumonia, pleurodynia, myocarditis, and meningitis. So this is in the human coronavirus section, and it says here that some strains can do that. That's what this strain does. It does that. It's the military bioweapon strain. An agent termed Tetnang virus has been isolated by inoculation of cerebrospinal fluid. This is like, a brain wasting disease. This is like fucking mad cow. Airborne AIDS that turns into mad cow. Not Rachel Mad Cow, but the fucking, mad cow disease out there. Let's see, the virus and similar isolates probably represent MHV strains. Now, there is also, somewhere in this talking about, antibodies or antigens not necessarily correlating with immunity. And I think, we'll probably hopefully get into that, stumble into those paragraphs. But essentially, there were some coronaviruses where immunity maybe only lasted days. The development of the common cold was studied in human volunteers inoculated with HCV. Virus inoculation by nasal drops causes predominantly coryza, but in contrast to rhinoviruses, no cough or mucopurulent nasal discharges occur. Virus shedding decreases sharply within 3 to 4 days. No evidence of involvement of lower respiratory tract. And there were some other ones, though. I think we're going to get into the good stuff. But there are some other ones where, when this thing goes chronic, people can be shedding virus for months and months and months. That's why they were rounding up and liquidating, the positives in China. The cilial epithelium is selectively infected, and shedding of antigen-containing cells coincide with coryza. Rechallenge of volunteers with homologous and heterologous virus 8 to 12 months revealed that no cross-protection occurs from different strains, but immunity against homologous virus exists, at least at that stage. The systemic immune response against purified HCV coronavirus and subcomponents have been quantitated by an enzyme-linked immunoassay, and the results indicate that most of the antibodies produced during infection react with the peplomer protein of the virus. Only small amounts of antibodies recognize the matrix and nucleocapsid protein. No data on the role of local immunity in protection against respiratory diseases are available. In addition to respiratory disease, some human coronaviruses may be associated with enteric infections. That's the gut. However, no information exists on the characterization of these agents and the serological relationships to other human coronaviruses. Coronaviruses have also been associated with endemic nephropathy, but there are no studies revealing an etiological link between nephropathy and coronaviruses. I think nephropathy is the infection of the capillaries, but I'm not sure. 2 coronavirus strains were recently isolated from mice or mouse tissue cultures during attempts to isolate viruses from patients with multiple sclerosis. The first isolate designated SD virus was isolated with intracerebral inoculation, etc., etc. Let's see, within 2 to 6 months, mice developed neurological signs and died. The second isolate, designated SK virus, were obtained after 12 subcultures, etc., etc. And at the present time, it cannot be decided whether these isolates have been derived from human or mouse tissue, etc., etc. Let's see, I think there's some more stuff here. I think it's all related because, you know, this weaponized strain is going to have the worst of the worst qualities of all of these coronaviruses. And we're seeing, you know, evidence of that in terms of, you know, what's being reported right now. The virus replicates in bronchial tissue, lung, kidneys, ovaries, oviduct. You know, we heard something about sperm count with this virus. Infection, presence of high antibody titers, often accompanied by severe nephritis. That's like, you know, kidneys. And infectious virus can be re-isolated from cecal lymph nodes up to 8 months after infection. So the lymph nodes are part of the immune system. And, you know, people remember the bubonic plague, the bobos that would come out were basically lymph nodes. They would explode. Both age and genetic factors influence the outcome of disease. In addition, infection from bacteria, mycoplasms, or infectious bursal disease virus increases the susceptibility of this type of coronavirus. So, you know, other infections, cross infections may make it worse. There's probably a long list of things that make this worse that we don't know about. Resistance to natural infection or experimental challenge after vaccination is probably mediated by local immune response. Detailed knowledge of the cellular immune mechanism is not yet available. No correlation between serum neutralizing antibodies and resistance to reinfection has been shown. I think that's a real interesting statement, even for the unscientific minded. No correlation between antibodies and resistance to reinfection has been shown. That's like the simplified version. No correlation between antibodies and resistance to reinfection has been shown. So it's like HIV. You know, they can do an HIV test based on antibodies, and you would think, well, there's antibodies, so the body is actually fighting the infection, but not so. And especially not with this coronavirus that attacks the T cells just like HIV. So, I mean, this broadcast really is a mouthful, isn't it? Let's see. But this kind of gives us an idea of what's coming, right? Protection seems to be correlated to resistance of the tracheal epithelial to challenge virus. So, you know, a lot of this virus, you know, begins in the voice box, basically, and you know, in the windpipe, the voice box, the larynx, pharynx, etc. And so every time you talk, breathe, you know, the virus is shedding out. Let's see. And it's causing clouds. It's like every person is like a lit cigarette. Secretion of local antibodies can also be demonstrated in organ cultures. Cross protection against challenge by virus strains can be measured by observation of ciliary activity, etc., etc. The local antibodies response is quite independent, etc., etc. Let's see. What else? I think we might really be at all we wanted to talk about. Cell-mediated immunity is demonstrable by specific lymphoblast transformations. I don't think we'll get into that. Let's see. But basically, in all of the coronaviruses that are described, what's classic is the acute infection and then the chronic infection. And so they're not talking about that, but this is in, textbooks, since the 1970s. So, and we're starting to get hints of that. We're starting to get hints of reinfection, et cetera, et cetera. We're starting to get hints that, it's attacking the heart, it's attacking the kidneys. It's not just the lungs, right? And it's also attacking the brain, the nervous system, nuke the Chinese. So that's basically all, we have to say at this stage. But this will go into cats and dogs. We've seen, reports of cats and dogs testing positive for the COVID. And the pathogenesis is pretty much, the course of the disease is pretty much the same. Certain, animals or people won't display symptoms and others will. And we really have to figure out what those cofactors are. And anything that suppresses the immune system is, a cofactor. And that includes EMF. That includes Wi-Fi, cell phones, cell towers. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. So it makes it worse. And, again, we talked about this yesterday and the day before. We look at the areas with the most advanced, cell phone networks, and those are the areas with the highest cases, the highest deaths. The virus is being activated there. Whether they know this or not is another story, but they probably know this. And this is why, it is what it is. This is why they've rolled out the 5G. So canine coronavirus, everybody's at risk. What else we got? The HEV coronavirus infects neuronal tissue, causes a wasting disease like, the mad cow disease. Let's see, the disease was first described in a zoonotic outbreak in Canada and swine herds, et cetera, et cetera. But, they all kind of act the same way in the organisms that they infect. So, whether it be pigs or rats or mice or birds, you basically get the same kind of disease in all of them. It's just a matter of, is the virus adapted to infect that organism? And obviously the new virus is designed to infect humans. So we can expect this, smorgasbord buffet of symptoms in all people that are infected. And I think the big takeaway here, we'll probably leave it there, but the big